What's up, everybody? So I've been getting a ton of questions about my gap year, what I did in my gap year, how I decided to take a gap year, the pros and cons of gap years. So I'm going to address all those questions in this video, and I hope you enjoy. Oh, and before I forget, I actually got featured on Dr. Ryan Gray's podcast, The Pre-Med Years, and the link to that podcast is right down below. I'm super excited about it. I hope you guys find that helpful. And yeah, that kind of made my day. I love him. I love the fact that he's such a great mentor, and I think we have a lot of common goals. So without further ado, I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and more importantly, this video. What's up? We're back on the small screen, and now I just want to go ahead and get into the details of today's presentation. So let's do that. Today I'm going to talk about what the gap year is, why I did my gap year, my personal gap year story, and then I will tell you some pros and cons, both of which are things that I've learned during my gap year, and recommend to you. Finally, the final verdict is kind of intended to be like a recommendation to you as to whether or not I recommend the gap year. So let's get straight into it. What is the gap year? It's the year you take off after your undergrad career. Most of you are in undergrad, you graduate in June, and most people spend that year right after they graduate undergrad as their gap year. And in that year, you actually end up applying to medical school, because applying to medical school takes an entire year. So in June of the year that you graduate, you have to submit your primary application. So that's a big deal, because that is huge, right? So primary applications are due in June. So you just graduated, and then you have to submit your primary. And then from July to August, you have a bunch of secondaries that are coming your way. So now you have a bunch of secondaries. And then from September to February is what we know as interview season. So you have interviews going on then. So the point is, notice that this entire process takes from June to February. That is a whole year, and that's why you need a 1 year to apply to med school. And some people don't want to do that while they're in school, so they actually take a year off after undergrad to apply to medical school. The part about the gap year that's different is you can do whatever you want in that gap year. You can take classes, you can not take classes, you can do research, you can do shadowing. It's pretty much open to do whatever you want. And the problem with that is most of the traditional pre-meds have been in school for 16 years. We're used to structure. We're used to people telling us what to do. Because, okay, you might get choice in like what classes you want to take, but you never had the option of not taking classes at all. And that's why this year often is very difficult for a lot of students, because they're like, I don't know what to do. Do I even need to take a year off? There's a lot more flexibility is what I'm trying to say. You have a lot less structure and more flexibility, and that can be one of the reasons why a lot of people don't want to take a gap year, because they don't know what they would do with it. I think the best way to answer that question is to look at someone who has taken a gap year. So now, let me tell you why I took a gap year and my main reasons for taking a gap year. I took a gap year primarily because one of the reasons was I wanted to spend time with my family. I knew that more likely than not, I would go to medical school outside of California. So what happens then is I'm probably not going to see my family all that much, especially because med school is insane. So I wanted to make sure I spent some time with my family, and believe it or not, that's a phenomenal reason to take a gap year. Another reason I took a gap year was to do a quality job on my application. I told you the application season for med school is intense. The primary is 20 pages long. All the secondaries are huge, and every secondary comes from every school, and you have to like grind them out, and you have to do a good job on them, right? Some people who don't take a gap year and want to go straight to med school from undergrad, what they actually have to do is apply during their third year of undergrad. When you apply during your third year of undergrad, that means you're trying to do secondaries while doing midterms in school, while like figuring out your life. Like, that's a lot of stuff for me. My brain can't handle that. My brain is too small for that. So I had to sit down, and the good part was by taking a gap year, I could be like, okay, my only priority right now is med school. And I focused on med school, and it was all good. That's the best part. Another reason I took a gap year was so I could work part-time. As some of you know who have watched my med school expenses video, I will link it right up here, but to apply to med school, it cost me $8,600. If I applied straight out of undergrad and I didn't take a gap year, that would have come straight out of, I don't know, loans, right? Whereas by taking this gap year, I was actually able to pay for all of those expenses on my own because I was working a part-time job. Always remember, applying to med school and even going to med school is expensive, and you want to make sure you're making the right decision when you apply, and you don't want to spend all that money if you don't have to, especially on loans. So the best part is I got to work for it. And the last reason I took a gap year was I hadn't been to my hometown of India in over 12 years. 12 years is a long time. There were a lot of people I hadn't seen in a while. And the best part was by taking this gap year, I was able to go to India 3 months ago and see those family members that I knew I would not likely see once I started med school. So you have to like keep that in mind, right? Like, is there somewhere you want to go? Is there a trip you want to make? Because trust me, once med school starts rolling, that kind of stuff is hard to do. And the good part is if you take a gap year, you can make it happen. All right, so now let's get really specific. Here is exactly what I did during my gap year. Specifically, you'll notice that in the fall of 2016, which is basically right after I graduated, the summer of that year, and then the fall of that year, I continued my job as a Kaplan MCAT tutor. That was the main part-time job I held throughout this whole year. I also served as a health advocate, which basically just meant I was volunteering in a hospital. So here's one thing that I think is important. If you have a weak spot in your application, or if you have a part in your application that you think you need to improve on, you can use your gap year to do that. In my case, I didn't have very much shadowing going into med school application cycle. So I was like, you know what's going to happen? I'm going to take part of my gap year and I'm going to shadow. So the first half of my gap year, I was actively shadowing and volunteering in a hospital because I didn't think I got a chance to do that while in undergrad. Another big thing I did during my gap year was I continued to teach biology at Berkeley. And another good part about that was this was also another part-time gig. Good thing about part-time jobs is that they don't take up a bunch of your time. So I was able to bring in a decent amount of income while also getting the flexibility to pursue other activities such as volunteering in a hospital and shadowing. And the last two main things in this here, the last two rows, the second to last row says I was applying to medical school. So of course, the first half of my gap year was spent applying to med school, and that includes writing my personal statement, my secondaries, and also finishing my first round of interviews. So fall 2016 encompasses all the way through December. So December is already interview season, right? So I had 6 interviews I had to finish by then. And last but not least, this is probably the coolest thing I was able to work on during my gap year. I always knew I wanted to create an organic chemistry board game. Ever since I took organic chemistry, I wanted to do it because I always thought it was like a game. And so this year, I actually started to try to enact that idea into reality. And during the first half of my gap year, I actually tried to, hold on to it and create a project behind it. And it was called React. And now going into my second semester of the gap year, spring 2017, what I actually did was I continued my part-time job. I stopped volunteering in the hospital. I stopped shadowing because I was officially done. And then I actually had to continue applying to medical school, of course, which included my second round of interviews. I had 5 total interviews then. And the last 2 things were pretty much the only things I did for the second half of my gap year, which was to work on my board game, which is now a reality. We're manufacturing this board game, guys. It's the coolest thing. I'll link it below. And the second thing was to make this channel. I started making this channel really active in January, and ever since then, it's been a huge personal project of mine. This is just a lot of the technical stuff I did, but you'll also notice I had a lot of fun this year, a ton of fun. Grey's Anatomy, Better Call Saul, see Stranger Things, pretty much every show on Netflix I was able to watch. I got really into podcasts. I listened to a bunch of podcasts, and I ran a lot. I'm a runner. I got back into running, and so it was great, man. I love this year. It was the perfect combination of exercising my intellectual side alongside my other interests. And now, I'm just going to go into the pros and cons of a gap year. The pros of a gap year, just from my perspective, is I got time to relax and unwind before the madness of med school. Every person I've talked to that's in med school tells me to enjoy it while it lasts. Not med school, my gap year. They tell me to enjoy my gap year while it lasts, because once you start med school, it's like rolling downhill. It's not going to stop. And so you got to make sure you relax, you know who you are, you find yourself a little bit before you start that craziness. Another thing about the gap year was it gave me time to join a work environment and deal with something that's not school related. I've been in school for 16 years. Many of you have been in school for a while. It can be often very difficult for people who have been in school for a while to understand what business is like, right? And the good part about my gap year was because I shadowed and because I was in a hospital a lot, I got to see how the other side of the world works, the non-school side. Because as a doctor, you're not going to be in school. You're not going to have a strict schedule. You're going to have to kind of understand how the business works. And I got a good visualization of that during my gap year by pursuing these activities. Third one, chance to pursue side projects. If you have something you want to do, your gap year is the time to do it, man. I wanted to create a board game, and I was actually able to. I wanted to create this channel, and man, I was able to. And I always knew I wanted to do both of these things. I just never had the time, and this gap year was that time for me. And of course, I already talked about this, but reunite with family, man. You can never prioritize family enough. And I want to make sure you emphasize spending time with your family. And the last 3 here, focusing entirely on apps. I still have zero clue how people go straight out of undergrad to med school, because that means they were applying and interviewing and taking midterms. I have so much respect for that because I have no idea how people do it. I need to focus, and this gap year gave me the time to focus on my secondaries, my interviews, my primaries, and that allowed me to know I was going to do a good job on them. I don't think I could have done that if I had midterms to worry about, finals to worry about, research to worry about, everything that undergrad has to worry about. I just can't. And last but not least, I was able to catch up on sleep and obviously mature as an individual. This gap year had a lot of personal development for me. I learned how I am as a leader. I learned how to, go out there and make things happen, and I don't think that would have happened if I had not taking a gap year. Now you're going to realize I clearly have a very strong bias for taking a gap year, because look at this con list. It's only 2 bullet points. I don't think there's very many cons of taking a gap year. You lose an extra year that you would otherwise have, which I agree, it's time. And you might also get too relaxed. This is something I'm worried about right now because I've been so relaxed this gap year. I've been able to do a lot of things, but I've been able to do them on my own time, make them happen on my own time. And now I'm starting to get homework from med school. I already got homework from med school. Can you believe that? But the problem is I'm like, oh my God, do I remember how to study? Like I haven't been sitting down at a table and working in ages. So I'm definitely going to make that transition. It's going to make this transition a bit more difficult, but I'm pretty sure it can still happen. Before I end here, I just want to go over some misconceptions about a gap year that are out there, and I know a lot of you might have these misconceptions, so I want to rectify them purely based on my personal experience and opinion. A gap year is not looked down upon. A lot of people think that if you take a gap year, it shows med schools you're weak, you can't handle med schools. And I'm like, wait, that doesn't make any sense at all. And I think most people who I've talked to on admissions committees and stuff, they actually value the fact I took a gap year. They want to know what I did in my gap year, because they know that gap years are a chance for people to mature, okay? And of course, more gap years are actually perfect. A lot of people think you shouldn't take more than one gap year. That's also incorrect. You can take as many gap years as you like. Because think about it this way, guys. If you take like 6 gap years, let's say you take 6 gap years and then still apply to med school. If you took 6 years off, you were able to see what's out there in the world for you. You were able to see that if I work, I could get a job straight off the bat and already start making money. And yet, after 6 years, you still want to apply to med school and devote the next 10 years of your life to education. That shows that you have a mental fortitude and resilience and dedication to stick to the field that a straight 21-year-old coming out of college doesn't have. So believe it or not, people who take a lot of gap years, I personally think they have a lot of maturity. They know why they want to go into medicine, and their resolution and overall fortitude is just so much stronger than an average pre-med who might not have taken that year off. And this is another pet peeve. A lot of people think that if you take a gap year, it needs to be science related. You need to do research. You need to like take science classes. Please don't get that misconception. You've been doing science for like 16 years that you've already been in school, and you will be doing science if you're doing medicine for the next 50 plus years, okay? So don't think that you need to have a gap year purely based on science. You don't need to do research. I had a friend who he's going to be at USC Med School now, but he was a consultant, a business consultant, and he basically got a lot of business exposure, and he loved it. Med schools loved the fact that he did that. I told you, I didn't do anything science related. I mean, I made a board game, but that's an entirely different project. I made a YouTube channel. That's an entirely different project. Think about what your passions are and pursue them. There was nothing wrong with that. And last but not least, there is no ideal gap year, all right? I think I've stressed this enough. Don't let anyone tell you what is right and what is ideal. There's no perfect gap year. You do what you want, you follow your passions, and you make things happen. As long as you're doing something, and as long as people know that you're doing something you care about, and you know you're doing something you care about, and you can elaborate on it to anyone who tells you about it, you're good. And last but not least, the final verdict, just based on my beliefs, I think everyone should take a gap year, if not more than one. I matured so much. I don't think I'd be the same person I am. I would be entering med school now as I would have been last year. I personally think I am a better person now. I'm much more confident in myself, and I think that was because of this gap year. Okay, so just my 2 cents here, guys. I need to state this. If you're going into medicine, you have a long path ahead of you. Like, honestly, for me, I'm still just starting med school, and I'm sure I won't be a full-on physician that knows every single part of his job, probably until 10, 12 years down the line. And so if it's going to take me 10, 12 years to get to that point, what's another year or two in the process, right? Like, let me mature, let me be okay with it. A year or two really isn't going to impact me. And so that's just another reason why I think don't let time be another determinant of how you run your life. Be okay with taking time off. All right, with that being said, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. I really appreciate it. We're almost at 2,000, blows my mind. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you soon. Thanks for watching.